Well, let's jump in. We got quite a bit to get through today. I don't know if we're going to make it through it all. I think I said last week we got maybe 2 weeks left on the abortion topic. We might have another week. I don't want to stay here too long because we got other issues we want to know. This is not America's issue. This is issues. So I want to get to other things, but I do think this is a big one. And I'm a big advocate for not only for myself but for other Christians to be able to say, like, if someone comes up to you and wants to talk about this, do we come across informed or do we come across like we don't know what we're talking about? Right. Because there's a lot of Christians that go out there and say, abortion, bad, abortion, wrong. But when they say, well, explain it to me from a biblical standpoint, they just go, I don't know, that's what I'm told. That's what my pastor said. That's what I've understood. They don't have any way of grounding that. And so I'm a big advocate for knowing what you believe and why you believe it. You know, Peter, he's the one that says, make sure you're ready to give a defense for the hope that you have. And he's talking about your salvation. We should not be uninformed believers. We should know what we believe and why we believe it. So that's why I'm kind of lingering on this maybe a little longer, is because I feel like the more time we spend, we can evaluate it, we can discuss it, and it just helps us to kind of navigate some of the questions that might pop up in the discussion. So that's where we're going to be at today, and we've got some more next week. But I want to start with just some questions really quick that I kind of was thinking about this week. The first one is, if the Bible doesn't define baby with a number of weeks, how should one proceed? In other words, what position do you take if we don't have something like that? And there's really two options, isn't there? If it doesn't definitively say this number of weeks, you can say, well, then I will decide it all the way up to 39, okay? Which we can make the argument that, Luke the physician, we looked at this last week, when he was talking to Elizabeth, he was talking about the story of Elizabeth and Mary coming together. He says the baby in Elizabeth's womb leapt for joy. And this was in her 6th month of being pregnant. And he specifically calls the baby in her womb a baby. So you can use Luke how you want. He was a doctor at the time, but he defined baby as at least, 6 months, right? 6 months. And so if the Bible doesn't say, okay, well, what about at 5 months? Or 4, or 3, or 2, or 1 week, whatever you want to call it. How should one proceed? Does that mean the Bible's giving us a pass to say, you decide? You get to pick. Or is it better to err on the side of caution? That's always my question. Should I err on the side of caution, or should I err on the side of more of my liberty? I can do what I want with this. So if you're acting in pride and asserting I have the right, not necessarily the best approach from just a godly principle standpoint, right? So I just want you to think about that. I kind of say this rhetorically a little bit because I've always wondered about the question, and I think it happens in a lot of instances where we're giving these kind of vague things, or we can try to narrow it down into a window, but we can't really get it down to one specific thing. And it's like, okay, God, what do you want us to do with that now? Do you want us to, are we given freedom to decide in here, or how do I approach it? And I think that I've always kind of landed on, if you had to stand before God today and give an explanation for that, I decided at, 4 months that it's not a baby. And what if God says, I disagree? Is he going to say, well, I didn't really give you the language, so I guess I'll give you a pass on it? We would hope that's what he would say, but do you know that's what he's going to say? We don't. What if he looks at me and says, nature attests to the fact that you should not have done this at any point? And what are you going to say then? I mean, I hope hey, I didn't know. Maybe he says, hey, you don't have an excuse. You knew because I put it on your heart. What if he says that? I mean, to some degree, when we talk about the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom, there's a reason it's the fear of the Lord. Because when you do something, you have to be willing to say, if I stand before God and say, here's how I came to this conclusion, is he going to say, that was the wrong decision and you knew it? It's kind of a deeper issue, to be honest, than even, I know it sounds weird, but it's kind of deeper than just abortion. Because it's actually a fundamental principle of authority, which we're going to look at a little bit today. because it really just comes down to is when do I have the right to stop this thing from growing? Stop this life from continuing? And that's a bigger question, because you could ask it and say, well, what if I'm in the government and I have to punish someone who's done a atrocity, and killed people and murdered? It's a bigger question. So we're going to kind of look at that today, because there are some things that are not defined as clearly as we want. And we can look at case law like we've done, and we've looked at all the cases to try to figure it out. And you can get to Scripture to say, I think it points to, at any point along the process, it's a baby. But I think it even goes deeper than that, and we can get to the bottom line and say, really, what's the big issue here versus the liberty of I get to decide? And we're going to look at that a little bit today. So I kind of asked that question, do we err on the side of caution or assumption? Well, I think I'm right. I assume it's not a baby. What do we always say about assuming, right? You've always heard that joke. Now let's talk about this for a minute. Okay, not just the design of a baby. Okay, we're going to set that aside. We're just going to talk about the design of God when it comes to humanity for a second. I know that sounds like a broad topic, but we're going to just park there for just a minute. So look in Genesis 1. Here's what it says. So God created humankind in his image. In the likeness of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So God makes man, he makes woman, and what's the instruction? So primarily, what is procreation for? Be fruitful and multiply. God says, here's the deal. I've made you very specific, and I've given you instruction. And come together and produce a baby, and do it a bunch, so that there's a lot of people. I want you to go, and I want you to take dominion over the earth, and I want you to grow. That was the idea, right? I mean, God didn't say, listen, I want you, man, woman, to come together, and it's strictly for fleshly, pleasurable type things, did he? He said, no, primarily this is for more people, and you get to participate in the process. So it's kind of a divine handing of the baton. Not completely, but sort of, isn't it? Because man is now participating directly in the thing God just did right here. God created humankind in his image, and now he's saying, you get to participate in that going forward. And so you're going to create more people in your image that are also going to have my image. See? That was the goal. God specifically instructed man to multiply. That was it. Have more kids, right? Have children. Has God rescinded that instruction that we know of to date? Not that I know of. I can't find a verse that says that. In fact, you can make the argument that God allows man to multiply. Remember, they get really evil. So God sends a flood. He leaves Noah and his family. And then what's the instruction to Noah when he comes out of the ark? And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So what's God's objective here?
Continuation of the human race.
Continue the human race. Have kids. Fill the earth. I made it big. Spread out on it, right? Fill it up. Take dominion over it. Be a good steward of it. I want you to do this. And then when we do it and we do it wrong, he says, okay, let's try it again. But the plan from Genesis, the very beginning was, I've made you, I want you to go and have kids. Isn't that interesting? Go and have kids. Fill the earth. God's design for procreation was primarily for increasing the number of people on earth and filling it. That's what sometimes is forgotten. Is the act, the tools for this are for this purpose. Primarily, I should say. Primarily. Okay? God's design also gave and gives human beings involvement of the divine creation process. Apparently, God wanted us to know what it was like to have something in your image that doesn't listen to you, right? No. Which is exactly what having kids is like, right? I mean, if you think about it, having kids, I mean, you could not get a better understanding of God's mind, as close as you can get anyway, with us by having children. I mean, having children or interacting with children or even having any kids that you're interacting with. Isn't it amazing how you realize really quickly what God was getting at? I don't know how many times I look at my kids and be like, why won't you just do what I say? I remember one time looking at one of my boys and saying, if you love me, you'll do what I say. And then I'm going, ding, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. It pretty much, there's something there where God wanted to say, you're going to participate in this because you're going to experience what I experienced to a degree. It's bigger than just you have the freedom to have children. There's something to it that God says this is important for you because it was so important for me to go from me to earth and kids when I could have been fine with just the Trinity, just me. But I decided to do this. And you're going to participate in that. You're going to get to experience that. Must have been pretty important. Must have been pretty fulfilling. It must have been something critical that God wanted. Human beings are able to make a decision. That sounds familiar. God decided at one point to do what? Create. And then after he made a decision, he took action. He made man and woman. And that's exactly what people get to do. We get to make a decision. We get to take action. And then initiate the creation of life. Right? Life comes forward. It's interesting how the same process is in our world. In our minds. Despite human participation in the divine act of creation, God did not make man the ultimate authority over life at any point. That's a tough one, because this is where we don't like it. Is that God comes in and says, I started this. Life only happens because I breathe life into humanity, into a person. You get to participate in the initiation of it, but you're still not the author of it. That sounds weird, but it's true. And I'll show you here in a second. And so ultimately there isn't a hierarchy of authority over life, isn't there? God, the initiator, man comes in, he can produce to some degree life, which God is still involved in. But if God says, you're not having any kids, could he do that? And you don't have anything to say about it, do you? We have nothing to say about it. That shows our not being on the same level as God. We are not gods, despite what we think much of the time. But God is still God, and so he can decide where life begins and where it ends and when it comes and when it doesn't. But he's still saying you have the opportunity to make requests. And I may honor that or I may not. But if I honor it, you made the request. There's a lot of what's our authority, what place do we have? And I think technology can really help with this. I mean, it's amazing the things that we can do to try to help people have children. But we still have to be very careful with this line of where's our authority over life and where's God's authority over life. Because even though with all the artificial intelligence stuff, man can't create life. Like, we tried. We tried to do it with computers. We tried to do it with software. It's not living. It's artificial intelligence. But God ultimately holds the authority over life, ultimately. And if we start there, it's going to affect how we think about the term life. All right, isn't it? Versus how we get to define it and how we get to adjust it and we get to determine what it is. Here this is out of Exodus. And you will serve Yahweh your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from among you. There will be no one suffering miscarriage or infertile in your land. That's what he tells the Israelites. So if you follow me, you can expect to have kids and not be worried about not having kids. So who holds the authority over having children? God does. It's his domain to decide when life begins or not ours. So what does this tell us about man's limitations in the creation process? God, I disagree. Man, I don't believe this. So guess what? We're going to have kids because we decided and we know how, so we're going to have kids, and they never get pregnant. What does that say about us as human beings? We don't have all the things we need to at will say we're going to do it our way. We still are subject to God's authority on the topic of life. Look at this in Psalm 127:3. Look, children are the heritage of Yahweh. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Okay? So, in God's perspective, what comes from the womb is a good thing or a bad thing? It's a reward. A reward for what? You know? A reward suggests you won. You did something good. You're receiving an honor. Here's in Matthew 19. You've heard this one. Then children were brought to him so that he could lay his hands on them and pray, but the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, allow the children and do not forbid them to come to me, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them. Notice there's two parties in this verse. There's the party, Jesus, who says, let them come. And then there's the other guys who are like, don't bother with them. That wasn't evil intent. I don't think they were saying take him out and kill them. But they were saying, well, he doesn't have time for them. And Jesus says, oh, I absolutely have time for them. So across the Testaments, does God have a special place for children? In fact, he even says here, unless you're going to become like little children. The Bible supports the concept that a baby is a human person in the womb and out of the womb. Would you agree? Now notice I did not say at 6 weeks in the womb. It doesn't say that. So you have to decide, do I err on the side of caution or assumption? Which one? Because the Bible says in the womb. The Bible does not support or promote the ending of pregnancy, but rather quite the opposite. Would you agree? I don't find anything in there that says, yeah, you should end pregnancies early. You should do it. We're for it. Children are always spoken of as a reward, a blessing, a gift, a heritage, etc. A good thing. That's what they're talked about. Being a good thing. The Bible never excuses, allows, or promotes the ending of innocent life out of convenience. Notice I didn't just say babies there. Innocent life. People who didn't deserve to die from a world standpoint. Okay? Yeah, I think they're just in my way. I think I'll eliminate them. Does the Bible promote that? Not at all. In no instance. Okay, so you just have to kind of say, I'm starting to get a picture of what God said and what the Bible says, even though it's not speaking directly to number of weeks and that stuff. You kind of get a general idea. God always promotes morality above the satisfaction of the flesh. Would you agree?
Yes.
This may feel good. This may, feed your flesh. But does God say every time you feel that, you should go with it? Now, in fact, he even says in Galatians, the spirit is at war with the flesh, so you don't do what you want.
Right.
Because where does the flesh lead? To death. Okay, so we just have to keep that in mind, that there's something greater than feelings that the flesh brings or promotes or is satisfied by. God does not require anyone to have children. The decision is up to us. And there were certain instances where people couldn't have kids and God miraculously got involved. But there are times where probably people could not have kids. Or they decided not to. Yeah. There's nothing spoken of how they're somehow condemned for that. So how does God want us to look at children based on what we've gone through? Precious, blessing, innocent, reward, gift, heritage, the future. You could all these good things. They're never talked about in a bad way. Isn't that interesting in the Bible? The moment you allow the killing of a baby in the womb, any number of weeks you pick, you have no grounds for allowing it to live outside of the womb. You realize that? Because what are we just doing? We're just redefining things. So let's just say 39 weeks, you can kill a baby. It's not quite born. The due date's tomorrow, but we're before the due date today. It's not born yet. We can kill the baby today? Is that what you're telling me? What about 2 weeks before today? What about 3 weeks before today? So there's got to be a point where people, this is what society does, is that our scientists and these people come in and say, well, let's find a date where we can agree that we think this is the case. And that's what they do. But it really just comes down to a matter of opinion, doesn't it? I mean, I think for us, we would say, well, we just talked about it. I'm going to err on the side of caution so that the moment that this child is conceived, I'm just going to err on the side that, if God's breathed life into this thing and it's growing, I'm going to err on the side of caution that it's a baby at any point. That's my personal position. Okay? That's my personal take. But anything outside of that, you would have to say, well, why is it all at 16 weeks? Why at 6 weeks? Why at 20? You have to ground that for me. Why not 39? Why not at 2 years old? You see where you open this can, it's hard to put the lid back on it. I actually have found why we do that. I found it. I'm gonna show you. So life becomes a matter of opinion at that point. Anytime you change it from moment of conception, you've changed it to a matter of opinion. Because even in the science community, I think science has proven, I'm with you on that, they have proven that it starts at conception. But you're always going to have those science groups that say, no, and they're going to battle it, right? But it's still just a matter of opinion. So I made that little joke, say goodbye to Noah Webster's work, because last week we looked at the definition of life. I did it, Jason, I know you weren't here, but we looked at the word life just so we could have that in there. But when it becomes a matter of opinion, Noah Webster, we looked at last week, he went through every language he could to try to figure out what was the universal definition of the terms. Goodbye to his work if it just becomes a matter of opinion, right? So what's the motive? This kind of gets into what we were talking about here, the motive. For those who treat abortion as an optional, convenient alternative, the motive is simply to feed the flesh and eliminate the commitment and the responsibility. Is that an accurate assessment? So this undermines and destroys the original design. Would you agree? And this goes against the laws of nature. Back to week 1. So I think I figured out where we got this from, this whole idea. This is a position that's been around for thousands of years, infecting the hearts of humans, and here's where it came from. But the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die, for God knows that on the day you both eat from it, then your eyes will be opened, and you both shall be like gods. And so what does that mean, to be like a god? You get to decide when life begins and ends. You get to make definitions and define things. Because guess what God did? He creates and he says, this is as far as the water's going to go, and this is where the land begins. Did he not define things? God defined things. And so part of being like a god is being able to define things. Right, wrong, limitations, what you can and can't do. And man likes to do that, don't they? We like to feel like we're gods. And so what do? The fundamental, the most powerful thing a God can do, based on Genesis, is what? Create life. And decide when life begins and when life ends. And so it makes sense that in the process of this, our fallenness, we would get to a point as these fallen gods to say, let's tackle the whether or not we can create life and take life, and let's define life. Before, we just kind of did what we wanted in our own worlds. People have done this. So it really comes down to, where are we in the authority line? Where do we think we are? And when we think we're the top gods, everything becomes permissible and possible, doesn't it? Because we just define things however we want, and we write things the way we want, and we make the rules we want. So it really just comes down to, if I were at some point at the fundamental level to say, I am not the highest authority, that there is something higher than me that I have to answer to, that established through nature the rules in which I should abide, and I recognize my position in relation to the transcendent God, it's going to change my whole perspective on how I conduct myself. Am I not? That's fundamental number 1, is, does God exist? And do I believe that he exists? And then the question is, who is he? If you can get through that one, you start to get to this place where you say, I'm not the highest authority. And now you can open up these doors. But we've kind of killed God to some degree in our society. And we say, no, we'll be gods. Which just goes all the way back to Genesis. So I call this the treatment. So enforcement of laws and rules by greater authority is the only way to prevent anarchy and chaos. If I have that fear of the Lord, fear of the authority, I'm going to think about whether or not I should do that. Just go, we all experience this with your kids. If they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, they're going to think twice, hopefully. That's the reason you put rules in your household, isn't it? A person with a God complex will consider all things permissible without consequence. There is no higher authority than me, so I can do whatever I want. An authorized higher authority with instructions to follow transcendent rules for moral conduct is the only measure to keep the God complex in check. In other words, the law. If you don't have the rule, don't eat of that tree, you'll do whatever you want. There has to be a higher authority establishing a rule in order to keep you from killing yourself or others. And that's a universal principle. It goes all the way back to Genesis, all the way to the beginning. Because when you have people that have been given this ability to make decisions and some power in the process, there has to be something to regulate that unless you are God. Because anything that's not God is lesser. It's lacking something by definition. And that's us. Romans 13, remember this verse? For rulers are not a cause of terror for a good deed, but for bad conduct. So do you want to be not to be afraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from it. For it is God's servant to you for what is good. But if you do what is bad, be afraid, because it does not bear the sword to no purpose. For it is God's servant, that the one who avenges for punishment on the one who does what is bad. So even in a government standpoint, God's saying, you're still not the highest authority. You might rule over this people group, but your morality better look like mine, or you don't know what good and bad are. So you better regulate, and you better pass laws that are in line with me on how to conduct because of the good and bad thing. So even here, what does it say? They're not there because we elected them. They're there because they're God's servant. It might be through an election process. But authorities are there because they're God's servant to see over the affairs of men to some degree. So let's look at these objections and argued exceptions for abortion real quick. Okay, we got the authority thing out of the way. I think I've got 4 of these we're going to look at, and we're just going to tackle them one by one. Number 1, the preborn is not human because it cannot interact and survive on its own. This is an argument that's made. So are there any other instances of a person being unable to interact and survive on their own? Those were some great examples. Think about those in a coma, or maybe someone who's disabled. Maybe they can't interact. Definitely can't survive on their own. An infant following birth, there you go. So these are all instances of living beings, would we call them not human. So for consistency, we couldn't apply this argument to the preborn because it doesn't work. We don't do it anywhere else that way. It's only in the womb, out of the womb now. And even some states, they want to take a baby out after they're born, right? So it's just going to get worse and worse. And now you could see how this could leach into, well, what about elderly people? What about the disabled? The infirm, whatever. Well, I guess they're not human anymore. We'll just take them out. See how when you take the cap off this, what springs out, you can't ever get back in? Would we consider any of these to be not human? It's obvious. Of course they're human, right? Of course they are. So this argument doesn't work. You can't just say it can't survive on its own, it can't interact. You can't use that one. You would have to eliminate a whole lot of people. What about this one? Birth defects. So here's the question. If a child is believed or known to have birth defects, does it warrant an exception and therefore an abortion? Before they're born, they're going to have birth defects. Now, even if they are going to have birth defects, this is my question. What's your motive? So you find out your baby has birth defects, and you say, okay, I'm going to have an abortion. What's your motive? Why are you deciding that? Because I don't want to deal with the difficulty. I don't want to have to deal with the struggle or have the kid deal with the struggle. So it's a convenience thing, isn't it? Remember what the Bible says? Children are even ones with birth defects. It's still right. People might say, okay, I can't afford the cost of this. Well, guess what that might take? A little faith. I don't want him to have difficulties. We talked about that. Would it be right to kill a child who was already born with birth defects for those reasons? So now we're back to that again. We wouldn't do it out of the womb. Why would we do it before? Convenience. Again, what if the diagnosis is incorrect? It's a great question. Here's Exodus 4. God's talking to Moses, and Moses said to Yahweh, "Please, Lord, I am not a man of words, neither recently nor in the past, nor since you're speaking to your servant, because I am heavy of mouth and of tongue." There's people that think Moses had a defect, like he literally had some speech impediment. And Yahweh said to him, "Who gave a mouth to humankind, or who makes mute or deaf or sighted or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? So then go, and I myself will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what you must speak." So again, we're back to authority. You think that it's your mouth that's going to do it? No. I can use whatever mouth I want because I created the mouth. See? John 9. And as he went away, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" Good question. Jesus replied, "Neither this man sinned nor his parents, but it happened so that the works of God might be revealed in him." You think I need him born perfect? I need him born exactly how he's born, and I am not limited by that. Again, who is it that's the authority? Here's a case study from a medical school professor. This is a real one that was done. Here's what the professor threw to the students. The father had syphilis. The mother had tuberculosis. 4 previous children. The first was blind. The second died. The third was both deaf and dumb. And the fourth had tuberculosis. What would you advise the woman to do when she found out she is pregnant again? Here's the response of the student. "I would advise an abortion." And the professor then responded, "Congratulations, you just killed Beethoven." This is just more of to shock you into realizing what humanity gained and what we would have eliminated. I mean, if you think about it, Mary would have been a perfect candidate for abortion. Especially in that culture. Here's a big one. Argument 3, rape or incest. Okay, we're going to talk about this one coming up when we get into the next week, because we're going to talk about the positions in the political world on this, because there's some that are more radical than others, but we need to kind of look at it from a broad picture. So next week we're going to even talk about this from a political standpoint a little bit more. But this is a big one. This is one where Christians will start to kind of go, I might be on board a little bit. Let's talk about it for a second. What is the motive for ending a pregnancy due to rape or incest? What's the motive? I don't want to have to go through it. I don't want to deal with possible birth defects. It wasn't in my time. It wasn't when I wanted. It was a bad memory. I mean, it's really to try and keep ourselves from having anything negative in our mind happen to us, right? People say, like, difficulties is going to make it harder for my young daughter or my kid, or financial hardship again. I can't afford this. So would it be okay to kill the child conceived by this man or after it was born? Okay, so you're back to that again. You can't say anybody that was born from these things should be killed as they stand today. So why would you say they should be then? The person, the one sinning, will die. A son shall not bear the guilt of the father, and a father shall not bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be on him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be on him. In other words, everyone is responsible for their own actions. You don't punish somebody else because of someone else's wrongdoing. This is the same thing in Deuteronomy. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children. Your kid screws up, you're not going to have to pay for it. You may some way, but you're not going to ultimately have to pay the penalty. And children shall not be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. You're responsible for your own actions. Your parents may have done the wrong thing, but it's your job to say that was wrong and do what's right. And God says, yeah, then you're going to live. So in the instance of rape or incest, who is the guilty party? It's not the baby in the womb, is it? It's the rapist. It's the person, it's the adults who did this, if there's 2 involved, or maybe it's just 1. But it's not the kid. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
So here's a couple things to note on this argument. This is as of 2019. There were 720,000 abortions in the U.S. in 2019. That should get your attention right there. 1% of abortions are due to rape. I did the math. This is as of 2019. The thing I guess I wanted to point out was, if you put in the millions, you could still do that.
Sure.
The 1% is the key. We kind of throw this out there and we think, oh, well, but it's 1%, and the abortions due to incest is 0.5%. So you can see that. What about all the others? I mean, that's only we'll take 9,000, maybe 10,000, 9,100 out of 607,000. If these numbers are accurate, you're still not even close to the majority, are you? So again, what about the other 598,605? That was my question. 74%. In this study, this was a Barna study, said having a baby would change my life. That's why they said they wanted to have an abortion. 74%. 73, they give them multiple questions they can answer. 73% said, I can't afford a baby now. Oh, that's a reason. See, now we're back to financial hardship and I don't want to have to deal with life change. 48% said they didn't want to be a single mom or that would cause a relationship issue. I don't want, see these God complex things? I don't want that. 38% said they're just done having kids. We just didn't want to have any more children. So they had an abortion. We're done. Quiver's full. We're had enough. I think we're going to save this one until next week because I want to spend some time talking about this one.